Okay. Well, why don't wait until the panel discussion is over, and okay. Yeah. All right.
Until you're free.
Okay.
One more person who's not here.
I guess so. Yeah.
3 out of 4 is not bad. 3 out of 4 is not bad.
No. We've got the sound effects going in the back.
So, do we have a moderator?
We're ready to go? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
She's the...
Okay.
Right?
Your point is I keep that microphone down until someone. All right.
Yeah.
Over here. This one.
Charlie's Bible. Okay.
I started taking notes on that one.
Okay. All right. So, hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming. This is the LPFM workshop, and all of us on the panel here work with different LPFMs in Oregon. So I think we're going to start...
On
Washington. So, thank you.
No problem.
Thank you. And
yeah.
I think we're going to start with just kind of brief introductions on who we are, the LPFM that we work with, and then just why you got involved or how you got involved with your respective LPFM, starting to my right.
Okay, my name is John Abbe. I live in Eugene, Oregon, and we cover a much larger area than we thought we would, 97.3 FM, KEPW. So we're very excited looking at the map now versus what we thought for a few years. I was really briefly involved in Free Radio Berkeley, or Berkeley Liberation Radio, in the late 90s, early 2000s. I had a show for about 6 months, once a month, and I facilitated one meeting where there was a fight. And, I totally appreciated what they were doing in so many levels. And one of the most exciting things to me about, and what makes it compelling for me, is that the hundreds to low thousands of new low-power FM stations across the country right now represent the success of a grassroots, even illegal, movement to achieve something that now is a platform upon which people who want to do more of that, and people who just want to do music or have a voice for their, all kinds of wonderful purposes, which was the point. This platform now exists and is itself a proof of the success of the kinds of movements that we know we can help to support and engender. So that's so exciting to me. You may be able to tell. I almost can't stop myself often from pitching in whatever way I think I can be helpful.
So my name is Jessica Poneman. I am one of the founders of Freeform Portland, which is an LPFM. Our antenna is located at the radio room on Alberta. And in the audience actually is our board president, Becky Myers, too. I started initially as the board president. Our station has been on air now. It is our second year this month, actually. But before that, as I'm sure many of you who work with LPFMs know, there was a ton of planning and preparation before we got on the air. So we have actually, I think our first board meeting took place about 4 years ago. It took us about a year or two to get on air. And that's one of the things I would like to talk to later on in this session. If you have questions from the audience, or kind of one thing we can address are some of the challenges that we faced getting our stations on the air, and then how we sort of overcame the challenges and the resources that we were able to find to assist us. So that's a little bit about me. We're 90.3 FM. You can get us actually at Open Signal. So if you want to tune in while you're driving around here, feel free. Our platform is music. We're 100% music, 24 hours, 7 days a week. We have over 200 DJs trained. All the shows are local. We do have one show that is a remote broadcast it's actually still within Portland, and it's there's just we work with people with disabilities, and there's getting into the studio is difficult for some of them, so we kind of remote them in from their location. But otherwise, everyone comes to the studio to do their shows. That's a little bit about Freeform Portland.
So my name is Sam Mulvey. I'm a little bit different than most of the people on this panel in that I've only been involved with active LPFMs for the last about 10 months at this point. I was involved with an attempt to get a construction permit in Tacoma, Washington that failed. And then a couple years later, I went to a Radio Tacoma meeting, which is a KTAH LP, 101.9 FM, Tacoma. I also talk on the radio, if that's not clear. But I sat down and discovered that they had a great need of technical expertise, and was kind of promoted to chief engineer on the spot, for lack of a better way to put it. And then while we were working on Radio Tacoma, we were approached by the other organization in Tacoma that had a construction permit, and I was given sort of license to put that station up, and that would be KTQA 95.3. And while it took the Radio Tacoma people 2 years plus to get on the air, or 4 years plus to get on the air in Tacoma, KTQA was up in 9 days. We had some major help from the community, and just surprising help from where you could get it, and it was an amazing thing. At the time, I was on a bit of a mental vacation up on Mount Rainier, and so I said, well, you need to come down off the mountain and build a radio station. So that's what I did. And so what we've been doing with Radio Tacoma is that we've been in soft launch for since about August, where we're introducing ourselves to the community, and Radio Tacoma is operating on a using the community media model in a long way. We want to meet the people of Tacoma. The interesting thing about media in Tacoma is that there's tons of radio stations in Tacoma, but you wouldn't know that by living there, because they're all pointed at Seattle and covering the Seattle market. There isn't very much media that's very Tacoma centric, and that is the major goal of both of these radio stations, is to bring the stories of Tacoma to the people of Tacoma, because generally the people of Tacoma get stories about Seattle. The large portion of what I've been doing since then is building out the radio station, and specifically my largest goal is to use a completely open source chain from studio to transmitter, and I'm mostly successful in that my own radio show, Ask an Atheist, with Sam Oldie, hello, has been operating with an open source studio to commercial radio stations for 5 years. And so I'm just taking that technology and applying it to the LPFM milieu.
Well, now that you kind of all heard a little bit about us, I do want to open the floor up for questions from our audience. Like I said, I want to make this meaningful and productive for you guys. So if you have specific questions for us, please. Thank you, Becky.
Is this on? It is. Okay. Because the title of it is Running and Operating an LPFM. What's the difference between running and operating? I mean, I don't do much running. I have operated in the past, but so in that way they're different things. But how does that differ? What are the differences?
That's a good question. So I think there are there's sort of general basic operational requirements for a radio station, and I think most people think of that as along the lines of broadcasting. So there's the programming, and then there's, antenna, and, your EAS system, and kind of just the components and making sure that everything is on air and, you're complying with state and federal regulations. I think that the operating part of this, and this is my interpretation, so if anybody else has a different one, I'm open to it. I actually did not come up with the title of the workshop, but I think the operating part, at least from my experience, has been it's not just the basic equipment. It's about, for us, because we're limited in resources, it's about inspiring volunteers to devote their time to helping the station continue to grow and expand. And I think that's the piece that, for me, has been the most fun, the most rewarding, but also the most challenging, too. Did you have anything that you wanted to kind of add along the differences between operating and broadcasting?
Yeah, I mean, it's open to a lot of interpretation. But I feel like one thing it seems like you were pointing out was kind of the difference between the technical side and the human side.
Yeah.
And I think that's totally there. And then like there's other things that are sub those or separate, that it's like the legal side. Like the legal side is human, but it's this thing that has a particular set of expertise that you talked about, where you walked in and you knew enough engineering for them to just make you an engineer. You have that first person walk in who knows law or finance, and suddenly they find themselves with an opportunity to volunteer and hopefully be inspired and stay on. So yeah, I think we could brainstorm a list of those things. That would be interesting, and valuable if we wanted to.
I have to admit the chief engineer title is more aspirational than anything else. But operating an LPFM station is that's the radio station stuff. That's the FCC facing stuff. That's maintaining the logs, maintaining the transmitter. It's the operations end of it. Where running a radio station is facing, it's exactly what you guys are saying, is maintaining the radio station as an entity that serves the community. And from an engineering perspective, most of the time I'm thinking about, okay, is the what's my deviation look like? Is my antenna, what's the near field look like? Which is fun for me, but it's certainly not engaging the community and having a conversation, and that's where the running part comes in. That's the activity, which I think maybe it's not quite jogging, but it's something quite like it, I think.
Yeah.
Would you mind passing the microphone?
Hello, is it working? Yeah. Rick Gold from KEPW. I'd like to hear from all of you about your organization. Is it nonprofit? Did it come together with the radio station, or was it pre-existing?
Our station started with Eugene Peaceworks, which David Zupin is the president of the board here, applied for the license in 2013. It was the only group I know of in the Eugene Springfield area. And got the license. And we were sharing before how many years it took us, 3 or 4 years to get on the air, so we were relatively late, but we got it done. No table pounding. So it was a pre-existing organization that had a background in media. Do you want to speak at all to you were there more at the origin of that than I was. The microphone is, yeah.
Yeah, I think we were, as a peace organization, we had decided sometime before to get into media issues, and several of us were involved with media in one form or another, dealing with bringing in speakers and so forth. But when the idea of the radio station came up, Todd Urich was the person going along the West Coast, like Johnny Appleseed, encouraging people in all these communities to consider it, and we reluctantly decided to go ahead because nobody else wanted to do it. And so, with no idea of how much work it was going to be, and somehow, thanks and with great support from the community, both from volunteers and financially, we were able to buy the equipment, get on the air. Even though hardly anybody could hear us, the main point was to get the license. And then we moved to a different location where people can hear us loud and clear throughout Eugene and Springfield.
So my story actually is very similar. I also worked with Todd in Common Frequencies. I went to college. I actually... my start in radio was with KDVS in Davis, California, and Todd was one of our engineers there. I think during the 2013 window, Common Frequencies was able to kind of work with a few of the licenses, and so Freeform Portland was given a license. And I think initially we were set to serve as more of a backup for X-Ray. My husband's on the board of X-Ray FM, but then they decided to kind of go a different way with a Class D license, and so we had this LPFM license, and I thought that there was definitely the need to have another station in Portland. And so Todd is on our board, and we decided to move forward with our own radio station with Freeform Portland. And so that was kind of the impetus for us. I think what's unique about Freeform, we are a nonprofit radio station, and we really try hard to reach out to people who have different varying levels of experience with respect to community radio. So we have DJs, that are a little more seasoned DJs. My husband, we both have a radio show. We've been in community radio for a long time. But we have a turnover every 6 months. We get a new schedule for our radio station DJs. All DJs have to reapply for their shows. It's a volunteer-based organization, 100% volunteer run. So we really depend, kind of inspiring folks to devote their time to make it fun and engaging is critical for us, because otherwise, why would anybody want to be a part of the station? So we really focus on our volunteers and giving them using the station as a way for them to benefit personally, and also for the station. And so anyways, basically the 6 month schedule is a way for brand new people who have never stepped foot in a studio to get involved with the station, test it out. It's a 6 month commitment. So if they decide it may not be for them, we've had volunteers say, the show was very stressful for me, but I love working with the radio station. So instead of doing the radio station, can I work on the zine with the radio station? Can I work on coming up with really fun shows? One of the volunteers started her own booking service with shows and venues around town, and it sort of launched from the radio station, but she no longer has a show with us anymore. So it's sort of morphed into its own thing that's not just a radio station. It really is that community part of it, I think, is really critical for Freeform Portland.
In the case of Radio Tacoma, it was an organization that, as far as I understand, Luisa could probably speak more intelligently to that than I. It was an organization that came together specifically for the purposes of operating an LPFM within the confines of Tacoma. There's sort of a narrative to how this happened, in that there was one of the radio stations that was sort of in the leftovers of the Air America network, but had continued operating that kind of programming in the Seattle market until on the AM band until 2 or 3 years ago, where they went to sports talk. And there was a lot of people in Tacoma who were pretty unhappy about that, because then there was literally no outlet for the kind of stuff that they wanted to hear other than NPR in our market. And there was just the kind of stuff they wanted to hear wasn't happening. And we're talking about a diverse group of people, from organizations from trade unions to the Raging Grannies to all over the place, who were just interested in having real Tacoma-facing media in Tacoma, and they got together to form Radio Tacoma to get the station on the board. So it was intentionally formed for the purpose of creating the organization, but it was a bunch of diverse interests that sort of led to that creation. Did I do a good job there? Mm-hmm. All right, cool.
What about the 6 day?
We're still figuring that one out, to be honest with you. Wondering about the other one, KTQA. That's also a nonprofit. We're working in concert with Radio Tacoma. The interesting, one of the nice things about both of those stations is that their placement and the geography of Tacoma is that we have, between the two stations, we have much better coverage, and I think we're stronger together than apart. we're going to have slightly different approaches to the way we approach the community, but it will definitely be in concert rather than apart. Right now, KTQA is mostly in an engineering mode in that we only just recently secured a permanent transmitter site, and I'm in the process of trying to get the transmitter up, and we're also we don't even have a brand yet. Our for when we were operating for 6 months before the move, it was KTQA FM 95.3, so new, no motto even, and that was it. And it was like we didn't have branding. We didn't really have a message yet, other than we want to do we need more Tacoma voices in Tacoma on the radio, which sounds simple, but oddly enough, often isn't. So.
Is that the station that's on the roof of the college?
No, it's not.
Okay.
Yeah.
You want to tell them where it is?
Well, right now it's nowhere. Right now it's in my front room. But it's not on. It's being. I was unfortunately used as a cocktail table last week. I'm like, hey, maybe not that. Right now I was the day we were putting up the transmitter, which was at somebody's house, which is a common model for LPFMs. But this is just we only had it for about 6 months. There's this one tower in my neighborhood that I'm a radio guy. What's that tower do? What's on there? And there's nothing on it. There's just feed line dangling, and literally just big coax dangling. I'm like, what? Okay, I need to go take a picture of this. I need to figure out who owns this tower. And I get there, and so I'm taking a picture of it, and I'm looking around. Turns out it's somebody's house. And so, okay, let's be honest. What am I doing? I'm taking a picture of somebody's house at this point. It looks a little weird. So owner of the house comes out and says, "What are you doing?" I go, "Well, I want to figure out who owns this tower because I noticed there's nothing on it, and I thought maybe we could put something on it." It's like, what do you want to put on it? A radio station? One of those community radio stations? Yeah. Okay. It can't be this easy. And turns out never is. This was no exception. But once we figured out we could get that location, it's such a good location for Tacoma that it would have been ridiculous to be anywhere else. So
do you have an STA then?
Yeah. Well, right now we're right now KTQA isn't on the air.
What is an STA?
Studio.
Here, use the mic.
I can't remember exactly what the letters stand for, but it
studio
means you can be off the air. The FCC allows you to be off the air.
Oh yeah, we have the SDA filed, and it's actually a bit of a shame that Todd isn't here because I'm also working very closely with Todd at Common Frequency. In fact, he's helping me develop some of the technologies that we hope to use for LPFM, and that's kind of the big thing for me. Is I'm going to soapbox for a minute here, if that's okay. I am an open source developer. When I'm not doing community media, my background is in information technologies. I've been working in the internet my whole life, my whole career, and to not say anything poor, not say anything bad about anybody, anybody anywhere else, but we have a blank slate with LPFM, especially those of us who are coming who are coming to LPFM now, who are in the 2013 window, who are getting on the air right now. We don't have to speak to Comcast. We don't have to interface with any proprietary technology to get our content done and to get our voices on the air. Anybody within the sound of our transmitter can go to Goodwill and buy very inexpensively a way to hear our content. That's one of the biggest powers of LPFM there, is the fact that it is such a ubiquitous technology. And we don't have to go with the way that it was done before. We have a blank slate. We don't have to support a whole bunch of legacy technologies. And that's part of the reason why I'm trying to do open source all the way through, is not only am I going to do it this way, I'm sharing everything that I've done. I'm either using off-the-shelf technology or writing it myself if it doesn't exist. And at that point, I can share my work with other LPFM stations, and other LPFM stations say, well, I like how you did this, but it's not perfect, it needs to work this way, and then they contribute their work to it, and then we all work together, and we can create a completely new infrastructure that doesn't require, say, a barracks box, or doesn't require a lot of technology. And so the whole reason I'm here today is it's like to get that conversation started, at least here in the Pacific Northwest. Is I want it to be more than just my two stations that are considering these things. When you're getting started, it's the best time to learn the new thing. I'm not going to pretend that some of this stuff isn't hard to work with, but we're dealing with radio. It's already kind of hard to work with in some cases. And so that's why I'm here, I guess. So.
I have to respond to that because I've been a fan of open source since Richard Stallman cornered me at a science fiction convention in I don't know what, and it convinced me how bad Apple was. That's as good as Apple is in some ways. It's all still true. The free and open software is a commons. Mm-hmm. And when we contribute to it, and even just using it contributes to it, we are growing the commons. And especially if we say, even if we don't code, if we just say back, hey, this thing could be better, that makes the program better.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and, we have over 20 local shows already on the air. And so we're already not a blank slate, I guess, is part of what I'm saying. So I'm with you in spirit, and I appreciate what I've gotten so far is that you're not all or nothing about it, but kind of wherever somebody is when they see they could shift a tool. Mm-hmm. It sounds like I can reach out to you and see what the latest state of the art is and try to support that shift to using free open software.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. Not everything in our chain is open source either. I mean, everything has to be FCC type accepted. Mm. So our EAS box is, closed source. Mm. That's the only way you can do it right now.
Mm.
I've worked.
Ask you if you were working on EAS.
Yes. But I've also worked in community media. My radio show actually started out as a cable access show that we then took to commercial radio, and we had to work with what was already extant there. You have to work with the legacy equipment, but there's no reason to continue. My point is, there's no reason to continue on with the legacy if you're not using it right now. But just where you have the opportunity to build, try to build stuff that you completely own rather than just own permission to use, because that software at that point is then yours to do with, all the arguments for open source are very quickly, when you buy a commercial product, you own permission to use that project. You own permission to use that software, and that's it for the most part, especially with the modern EULA stuff. With open source technology, you own this, especially with computer stuff, you own the source code. You can make your own changes to it. And especially in a community environment like this, we can cross-train, especially if we work on, if we're making decisions based on a common platform.
I think kind of like in that sort of spirit, what I'm sort of getting from both of you is that I think there's like a really critical piece in order to have a successful station. You need to be able to partner and share information with one another. Maybe we could all kind of describe different ways our respective stations have like partnered, or like ways we've kind of shared information with the radio community, and maybe even larger than the radio community. That's been really helpful.
Sure. It's funny, the blank slate thing extends there as well. I think there are times and places, there are many places where we've reached out to existing stations and gotten information or even training on how they do things. I think there's other times where we could and we haven't, kind of out of wanting to figure things out ourselves in a way. But we've been very conscious of trying to reach out to different groups. We're a member of the Green Lane Sustainable Business Network in town, which is a whole nother interesting story. And then we developed a relationship with a local 24/7 Spanish language station, La X, and we started carrying 2 of their shows live Monday through Friday, one in the morning and one in the afternoon pretty quickly, and now we're working on a Spanglish morning show, and we've gotten other opportunities through them. So, in that relationship, I think we've also helped. Like I can feel it knitting parts of the community together, and I'm just like, oh, good, and more potential coming from it. a local WOW Hall, for people who know Eugene, the WOW Hall Community Center for the Performing Arts, reached out to us to do a co-benefit, which people have sometimes criticized them recently for not doing enough with the community. So this was an effort on their part, and we're a community radio station, and that word keeps coming up. And we didn't make as much money as we all wanted at the benefit, but we felt like the community building effort there was very positive. We all had a sense of a good feel. The nonprofit groups all had a great time talking with each other, and it was a good show and so on. So
And they want to do it again.
And they want to do it again, in other venues. Oh, that thing. Oh yeah, we want to have you back, or we want to have you to this new venue. So again, opportunities always seem to open up when you just reach out, build those relationships, and see what people can do together. Right, another success from the past, and people know some of the history in Eugene, the Hodads, the income from hippies planting trees in the wake of clear cuts, partly went into all the co-ops and whatnot there. One of the longest surviving ones is Growers Market, right by the train station. When they bought the building to make sure that could always stay there, there's all these nonprofit offices upstairs, and that's where we were. And that was our first, one of our early transmitter locations that we were looking at, which would have been great to be straight from there. But instead we got on a giant tower and have an even better signal.
And also at the law conference, the other radio stations we connected.
Yeah, I feel like we've talked on and off with people and been supported by and some of the other low power stations across Oregon. KOCF was very supportive right away, and Cottage Grove. I don't remember all each letters of each. And then we at the recent Public Interest Environmental Law Conference at UO in early March every year, which if you don't know about, you should check it out. We met with KQUA, which is Rogue Riverkeepers, applied for a license, and they also took a long time. They just got on the air, so they came and we talked with them, and they're like, "Oh, you guys are so together," and we're always like, "Oh, the things we do are falling apart and we don't have happening." And to hear them, who were behind us, I guess, in getting programming going and so on, it was really nice and affirming, and helped to remember to celebrate, whatever the half full is in the glass. As we address the other parts as well.
So yeah, I think very similar experiences for Freeform Portland too. I think everything from our studio building to our volunteers, all of it comes from kind of outreach into the community. So I had mentioned earlier, we're 100%. All the shows are in locally based. So. We really depend on the community for the station, and then the station wants to give back too. And I have to say we've been very fortunate in many ways. We reaching out to businesses, we have found contributions that they're willing to give us, things that we're willing to give. We found volunteers, they want to do radio shows, we want them to do radio shows. I mean, just all sorts of stuff. Even down to our equipment. So it was really funny when we launched, the new volunteers started their shows, and some of them were saying, "Wow, this equipment looks so familiar." And it turns out it should have, because they had also volunteered. There's a lot of overlap. They had volunteered with X-Ray, and it was basically X-Ray's first studio. So X-Ray, graciously donated the equipment to us for a very nominal fee. And we reused a lot of it because they had outgrown it. And so my point in bringing this up is, there's the community, the community stations that exist. It's just so important that we all talk to each other, kind of like what you were saying. When it comes to things like open source, we have playlists. There's so many of the needs that overlap with all of the radio stations that we don't each need to reinvent the wheel every time. And if we're open to sharing, I think it's so important that we succeed, all of us, because I think now there's this increased focus on the radio, where before I really felt like the shift was just going to internet based only, and we were losing the importance of a terrestrial signal. I think now that there's so many options that provide really good, interesting programming, then now there's this shift back to the radio, and I think that's really important. And I think it's because all of us are working really hard at keeping it alive. I know, and Todd Urich, he's not here, but I think this has been partly his dream too, and it's nice to see it come to fruition. So I think helping each other out, reaching out to the businesses, reaching out to other nonprofits who have similar missions. All of these things are so important to the success of the LPFM movement.
I think it's fairly clear that Radio Tacoma is a little bit earlier in its ballistic track, and one of the things about Tacoma as a region is we've never had a whole lot of community media whatsoever. We never had much of a cable access network in Tacoma. The radio stations were usually operated by the colleges and are now largish NPR affiliates or entirely given over to the educational aspects of broadcasting. So what we're doing is, what we're mostly in the middle of right now for Radio Tacoma is introducing ourselves to Tacoma and what we can do for the community. And I'm in love with radio and have been my whole life. And I'm like, and so it's a radio station in Tacoma for Tacoma. What's not to love? And the answer is sometimes many things. Can you please explain what this is? and that's been difficult. A difficulty for us is saying, like, no, community media means these things. But once we're starting to actually get some traction with people, we're like, oh, you mean I can do this? Like the local IWW wants to do a historical show about stuff that's happened in the region, and that's a big thing that's going on. This January, I actually taught a introduction to broadcasting for Tacoma Public Schools, and that's something that we're going to be doing moving forward, which is not a thing I expected we would ever be doing, was to have actual involvement with, because so far the city has been fairly hands off, but the public schools has been kind of interested, and that's really cool.
Well, and I think you bring up a point. I mean, sometimes it's not clear for somebody why they'd want to get involved with radio, but one of the things I've mentioned is, we're an all music radio station. We were putting on broadcasting and musicology classes for volunteers for free, and basically, like, you have to kind of explain, sometimes you have to kind of explain things that may seem obvious to you, but, may not be apparent to, like, a general audience. Do you like music? Do you like learning about music? Like, would you like to, like, use this as a way to learn more about music, hang out with people who are obsessed with music? Just, like, do you need some friends? Like, I've noticed, like, as you get older, it becomes increasingly harder to kind of connect with people on different things. And so even something basic, like, there's this really cool community that loves music. What do you say? And people, even if radio is not necessarily on their minds, end up really thriving in the community because that's what ties them together. So I'm not saying that needs to be the same thing for every station. I think that's what's cool about the LPFM movement, is that each station has kind of picked a different specialty or a different angle that they want to go with. But yeah, being able to connect with the community is important.
And the hyperlocality of LPFM, the fact that we're theoretically limited to 100 watts or whatever, gives us an opportunity for engagement that broadcast, commercial broadcasting or even non-commercial broadcasting in the past hasn't been able to consider. It takes 2 radio stations to cover one city for us, and that gives us opportunities to really target our locales in a way that broadcast media hasn't done before.
Yeah, if you have an issue in southern Tacoma, those 2 stations probably aren't going to argue about which station is covering it.
Exactly, yeah. And the other side of it is, before I moved into the LPFM space, I was on commercial radio, and it's still, even though it's hyper local, it still holds here. Is a lot of people who listen to my show, it's like, well, why don't you just stay on the internet? That's where I listen to it. It's where a lot of people listen to it. But I do a talk show, sort of a current events talk show from an atheist perspective. It's not evangelical. It's just, this is what we're thinking. And for us, the purpose is, and I think that holds true doubly or triply for LPFM stations, is the whole reason we pushed so hard to be on terrestrial radio is that, unlike the internet, terrestrial radio is not always a self-selecting audience. You literally have people just hitting the seek button, hoping to hear something that they've never heard before. And that's true for music, that's true for talk, that's true for poetry. And you have people who are constantly searching the dial looking for something, and LPFM can provide that in a way that not a whole lot of other broadcast services can. And I
Those are-
think
those-
that's so key.
Those are the stories I love hearing. When we go table at Saturday Market, or whenever I'm talking with people, I'm like, well, how did you hear about the station? If I don't know. And a couple times now so far, and I know I'll get to hear it more. I was just tuning the dial, and I was like, yeah. And what did you hear? And it's like, I heard kind of music I never hear on the radio. And somebody else mentioned a show. I don't remember which one. But it was, or overhearing people talk about a show that I love. On the station. It's incredible.
I'm dying to chime in.
Yeah. Let's take a question from the audience.
Please.
I'll take it, sure. So Rebecca Webb, Portland Radio Project. And I'm just so thrilled about this conversation. I mean, it's just giving me goosebumps hearing. And so I wanted to share, we've been on the dial since 2015. We're coming up on our 3rd year birthday. And we started out with Todd Urich, did our engineering report for us.
I've got to start talking with this
you
guy.
got to get an
Rebecca, I know are you with Portland Radio Project? Yeah,
yes.
okay. Rebecca's with Portland Radio
Exactly,
Project.
and we're a music station as well. So I actually was really excited to meet you today and talk about networking and all that. But our FM story was that we applied for a timeshare with the Q Center, and they decided ultimately that they didn't want to be in the radio business, and literally asked me what I thought they should do with their hours. I said, you should give them to us. So that's when we got on the dial 24/7, because it wasn't that easy to explain when you're only till 3 p.m. That's a kind of a harder story to tell. So anyway, it's great to be hearing from you. And we're sort of career broadcasters, is our founders are people who were in radio until ownership concentration eliminated most of our jobs. And so I wrote a thesis about that for Portland State University about, the democratic elements that, were snipped away with ownership concentration. And so that's how we came at it in terms of our foundation. And we're a 501c3, and we rely very much on musicians and the community to support us. But that brings me to something I actually want to ask Jessica specifically, and others if you have some suggestions. We're always trying to cobble together, even though, with the goodwill and networking of the community, there are still a lot of bills to pay. And I'm just curious if you can offer some suggestions for, what are your revenue streams that you rely on?
Yeah. So that's the $5 million question right there. I think the LPFM, it's not unique to even the LPFM. I feel like, when you talk about kind of that concentration and ownership, and that's happening at a national, even world level at this point, international level. And you see even other stations that have historically, that are very, they're not new, they're not LPFM, KEPW, they're also they're doing very well, but development and funds are always a concern, I feel like, for all of us, especially in the nonprofit world. So for Freeform, we rely solely on donations, and we have managed to keep a very shoestring budget. And that has been key to our sustainability. I think that in some ways it has limited our ability to grow. And I, speaking candidly, I think that the station has certainly been held back by the fact that we have such a shoestring budget that we aren't able to expand in the ways we would really love to. We think it's really great. We're 100% volunteer, but that also comes with certain limitations too when you have no paid staff. And so I think that we've managed to survive because of it, but it also is certainly limiting for us, and we have not been able to kind of get past that point where we have paid staff and we're able to kind of grow in as much as we'd like to. So I don't know, I know that doesn't totally answer your question, but really the key for us is we've just really cut down on expenses. And Becky is in the audience, our board president, and she's got a lot of development experience too. And I don't know, do you have any, do with the mic?
I actually,
thing you want to add?
It's something that we've been working on, because one of the critical things that you have to have in order to raise funds for anything is to understand what you're paying for and what you need in order to serve your mission. And right now we've been like building a budgeting process that's collaborative across all of the departments to find out what our actual costs are. And then from there, we will be able to create a plan. And so we right now rely on the on-air drives, but recently I was on an NFCB call with LPFM in Maryland that's run by Mike Starling, and they make $37,000 just by their underwriting. Their underwriting is a super elegant and simple solution. And so, like, what could that potentially look like for our stations as well? And there's other conventional, like, fundraising that's possible through direct mail, through, like, canvassing and phone calls, and through events. But there's also the potential, like you had mentioned, for instituting new systems. And so, like, accepting cryptos, having like on-demand like microtransactions through Cash or Venmo. I mean, like, there are a lot of different things that we can think about, but the thing that holds us back, like Jess had mentioned, is not simply paid staff, but the ability to put together the back-end administrative systems that you need in order to A, track money, and B, you know, see where you're paying it, and C, prove it to people that would potentially give you more.
Yeah.
Because they always ask for that. And so, like, we're building systems right now in order to create an environment where we would then be able to make grant asks, for example. You can't ask for a grant if you don't have a budget. That's just reality. So, like, and then what else does that need to look like? Would there be, like, a volunteer handbook that's kind of like an employee handbook? Is that something that's important to your organization? How many people do you have coming in? You know, there's a lot of back end that needs to be considered, and it's like the totally unsexy part of it, where you're like, I mean, yeah, totally, and that's what we're working on. And you know, like, you know, I love the intricacies of RF and like broadcast, like, you know, properties and things like that, and understanding like the cool engineering part. But man, that stuff does not happen with the unsexy administrative back-end stuff.
No, and I think it's kind of funny, the unsexy administrative, you know, like, and I'm sure people in this room know what I'm talking about when it's like you're developing those policies at the beginning and you're kind of just putting something together, and then something happens at the radio station where you're like, oh, probably should somehow incorporate that in there. Never thought this would come up. And so that's why I think it is so important. And I'm really excited to meet you because I've heard amazing things. And I love Portland Radio Project too. But yeah, it's funny because we don't need to have these things happen in a vacuum. I'm sure Rebecca and I and Becky, like all of us, could kind of exchange these stories where like we could help our stations grow exponentially, like just by talking to each other more often and more frequently, instead of
like check log if anyone ever wants to.
No, it's true, and like we've totally we've totally, like, we've referenced KEPW's like ways, systems, because again, it's like we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time something comes up, so other stations may have the answers, and reaching out is helpful.
And there's an organization that's here just to help you guys. It's called Community Media Assistance Project, CMAP. And between my husband and myself, we have 45 so many years of experience with not just LPFM, but non-commercial radio and commercial radio. So we know lots of shit, and we can help you out.
Awesome. I think we may have emailed a few times. Yeah.
Can we all exchange business cards before we go?
Yeah, I think that'd be an intense exchange of information. So.
Since on our side, since we're still in the very early phases, part of the reason I'm always hesitant to say that the open source thing costs less, because sometimes what you don't spend in money, you are spending in time. For a lot of this technology, it's new and it takes some time to learn. One of the things that I'm hoping to do is to change that somewhat moving forward for the community. But so since we are in the very early phases, we're soft launch, we haven't even had a grand opening yet. I'm looking at all, we try not to invent the wheel where we can, but I am looking at every wheel we're not inventing very closely to make sure if there might be a leaner and meaner way to use this wheel, or to maybe reinvent a small wheel here or there, in order to keep our costs under control, to keep the engineering part of it as lean and mean as possible, so that our larger forces can be saved for meeting the community. And that's where I'm at right now. A little early is just like, okay, right now I'm determined. There's something I said at a Radio Tacoma meeting is, first we have to determine that we are a radio station and not a restaurant. What is the difference between being a radio station and a restaurant? And to do those parts, I'm trying to make them as small as possible, using the standard broadcast methodologies where they work, and maybe saying, maybe we don't need to do it this way here. Maybe we could do it a different way here.
Well, one thing that I love, I feel like I've learned in the experience is, so you were talking earlier about the sexy or unsexy parts. No matter what part of the radio station I'm looking at, I've discovered somebody thinks it's sexy. They're like, oh,
that is a little bit of my problem.
Yeah, and then no matter what it is, including the content, some people, the music, because we try to cover a lot of things, and so whatever the content is, somebody's like, oh, I'm so glad you have that, and somebody else is like, well, why do we have that?
I have spent a ridiculous amount, like more time than I'm comfortable admitting, thinking about really cool ways I could keep logs. Oh, this sounds okay. We could do it this way. This could be really efficient. It could work really well. You
could talk to us.
I have just spent 10 hours. This is weird.
Yeah.
I need to reevaluate.
A piece of paper and a pen works surprisingly well.
It does, yeah. But it's also hard to search. Like, what did I do?
Just a general question to the crowd. Are there any of us in the audience that have a CP that have not yet gone on air? Any of us? Alan? Hi. How are you doing in your process? Do you have specific questions for us?
Well, I'm soaking things in. We have
Oh, yeah, sorry.
I'm Alan Bushong, and can you hear me?
Yeah. Yep.
Cool. I'm director of Capital Community Television in Salem, and we share a full-power radio license with Mano a Mano, which is a preeminent Latino group in Salem, and they're executive directors on our board of directors, and we're longtime friends. So we are, the license was granted, the construction permit was granted in November of 2015. We actually have a meeting Monday where we're discussing a major grant proposal for the one-time costs of starting up on transmission. And Michael Brown's a radio engineer. Y'all know Michael. Y'all know how busy he is, how hard he is to get. I just sent him an email about 10 minutes ago saying we got to work on the STL, and we got to work because we're wanting to put a backup tower on. In Salem, you use Upper Prospect, right? But we're also a joint information center and emergency operations center for our city and our county, which is huge for us. And we're going to put a backup transmitter on our roof. So right now I need Michael to work with Rick Amadeo for the weight loading on the roof. But what I'm doing is and we work a lot with KMUZ, by the way. Those are really good folks, and a lot of them make programs. So mainly I'm just collecting data. Obviously, any information I can get is helpful, but we would like to get on air this year. That's ambitious. We'll have mainly a public affairs bent because we're not going to compete with KMUZ. It's very successful. By the way, they went out of this too because they get to raise their transmission power substantially because we're going to lease them a HD channel so they can fill the service area. So I don't think I have any specific questions. I just keep writing stuff down. Though we're well resourced in television, we're going to have to operate a lot like you, and very small, low expenses, and very little staffing because we have an unproven track record in raising money for radio operations. And so I've taken about 2 pages worth of notes here. And this is a lot like, I got started in public access television in 1979. So this is a lot like, and I looked much more like you look in 1979 than I look now when my beard was to here. And I actually helped Madeline Murray O'Hare do the first 65 of her programs on the American Atheist News Forum on my own time.
Very nice.
So, yeah. So I'm just soaking stuff up and hope to be, we'll join NFCB and hope to be your colleague.
the GRC in October.
Yeah.
We'll do it.
What's your expiration date on your CP?
It'd be November of 2019, but
Okay.
we're not going to be pushing that.
And you did the 18-month extension?
Where it's an automatic 36-month because it's a full power.
Oh, I see. We're talking full power.
Yeah, it's a 25,000 watt license, but we'll have to stick with 2,500 so we don't get anybody else's contour.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but it's licensed to Dallas because Dallas had a great. Michael's brilliant, right? And
He
he's
is
brilliant.
brilliant.
So anyway, we're and we just got call letters, and we're not sure we're going to stick with them, but
You have to put the mic up to
oh,
your
that's
face.
right. I should do it again.
Anyway, we're probably going to go with Mid-Willamette Valley, KMWV, MWV, because we are the Mid-Willamette Valley, and though it's licensed to Dallas, it will be, and we're within 25 miles of the Dallas Post Office. We will be operating out of Salem, out of downtown Salem. So anyway, I may be contacting several of you just to say, so how do you do that?
Yeah, please.
So I'm wondering if there are other challenges that haven't been mentioned yet.
Oh yeah.
Other than the budget, yeah.
I mean, I have a background in facilitation and group dynamics and so on. So it's true of every group, but I think especially of when you're trying to do community radio and you're trying to let as many different voices as you can in. All of those skills and so on are really important. We make a lot of use every time we see an opportunity. There's somebody, a volunteer who might be interested or might not know they're interested yet. Reach out to them if somebody who has those kinds of skills when we need some outside support and an outside perspective or new ideas about how we can be as human beings together, one-on-one or in groups. To make decisions better, to be clearer about delegating authority, to be as clear as you need to be, but not trying to impose a whole system before it's needed. And that dance is, an ongoing challenge. Out of that other life, with a bunch of other people, we made a deck of good patterns to use in group dynamics. If anybody wants to talk to me about that afterwards, I love that. And there's that area is an endless source of. I mean, you referenced it first. The human side, is an endless source of interesting and different challenges.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I've learned through some of the challenges with Freeform Portland, at least, is because I think all of us are so passionate about working with these LPFMs, it's very easy to forget to take care of yourself. And so I think it's very important that while you're going through this really amazing journey, that you do take care of yourself, and that when you need to step back, you're able to say, like, okay, I just need to take a breather. But I have this amazing community that we're all working towards, and somebody's gonna come and step in for me for a little bit while I take some time. I just recently had a baby and started a new job, and so there was just a lot going on, and I felt so fortunate that the rest of the board at Freeform, that all the volunteers were able to step in when I was just unable to be there in a way that I wanted to be there. So I think that it kind of speaks to the sustainability element too, that if you create a system that's able to thrive and you're not the central point of it, then your system's going to survive. But if everything depends on you, it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot to take on as one person, and it also isn't going to survive if you're having a tough time. So I think it's so important to not just inspire volunteers to come, but take ownership in the station too. So it's some takeaways from
inspiring confidence in people that no, you totally can do this. We can all do this. This is the whole point of the community effort, is that we work on it as a community. Mm-hmm. We had our first major community engagement event 2 weeks ago, where we had a presentation, and we asked the standard questions where you put them on the board, and then we broke out into committees, which was interesting for me because my talk is, I guarantee if you want to work with the technical committee would be glad, because technical committee. And it was like a lot of people were like, oh, I don't know that I can help because radio is so complex. And I go, well, here's a list of the things we need. oh, I think I can do it. Well, okay, and just building the community, building the fact that getting around the built-in gatekeeping that people have. Like, to get over those internal barriers and to prevent no external barriers to access the station to allow them to take ownership has been sort of the front and center for me as I interface with the community as far as LPFM goes.
So I just want to follow up with something Jessica was talking about with the volunteers. We find that we have a lot of people who want to have shows and beyond the radio. And do you have any kind of a component where there's sort of a required give back? The back end things are not the things that people really want to raise their hand to do oftentimes.
Yep.
And I've just found that it's hard once they're in and on the air, to get them to pick up a task that needs to be done.
Yes, and it's the way Freeform has done it, I think, has really helped us quite a bit. But, I have seen it with other stations where, basically for us, what really helped was setting the expectations up very clearly when they showed interests in the station at the very beginning. So what we do is people will come to Freeform and say, well, I want a show. And I would say, fantastic. We're so excited that you're here. If you want a show, you need to demonstrate that you're able to commit 5 hours a month of volunteer work. And then in 6 months, we got a new cycle going. And I would invite you to apply, and you'd have the hours under your belt, and that actually carries a lot of weight when it comes to a show. There are other factors programming considers, but the volunteer requirement is absolute. We have kicked DJs off the air for nothing more but that they didn't provide us with the volunteer hour requirement. It's 5 hours a month, which is not, you go to a meeting, we have a monthly volunteer meeting, and that's 2 hours. So really, 3 hours of some of the less sexy administrative work here. Or sometimes, we find, we have a volunteer coordinator, and her role is to kind of find, based on their interests, what may work, what the station needs. So yes, I understand. I've seen this with some other stations too, where somebody gets a show and then they sort of feel like it's their right to their show, not just their right, but this is my show slot, and this is what I'm going to be doing. So I'm telling you, forever. And so I've noticed that a little bit. My old radio station functioned very similar. It was I'm sorry, you've had the show slot for 15 years. Nice work. Let's let somebody else in for a little bit. And so I've just kind of setting the expectations with the new volunteers. We're so excited to have you. And even if you give them the show, you can say, we're giving you the show as a test, but we expect some return from the station. We want you to feel involved with the station, to be a part of the community. And as part of that, you need to dedicate some time outside of your show. So I think just, very clearly setting, and then being okay with, the enforcement side of it, where you haven't done your volunteer hours.
That's the hardest part.
Yeah,
for sure.
We've had some people who've been upset with us too when they didn't get the shows renewed because they just had this expectations. A lot of the founding volunteers, I think, they were there at the very beginning. They worked really hard for the first year, and then they kind of felt like it was their free ticket for the next 3 years, that they should just be able to get a show. So I think recognizing, where that wasn't really the case.
Yeah, it's really a brilliant model to have the 6-month renewal. That's just a great tip for us.
Yeah.
And did I understand you to say that you really don't put anybody on for 6 months? In other words, they have to demonstrate their back-end volunteer commitment before they get to have
generally speaking, there may have been some, if we needed a 2 to 4 a.m. slot filled, there have been times where a new volunteer has come forward and we had an opening in the middle of the night, and so we would allow them to take that slot, but still contingent upon them volunteering. So, at the end of that 6-month window, if they weren't volunteering, they wouldn't get a show again. So as needs have come up, we've sort of...
And how do you have them account for their volunteer work?
So our playlist application has a login, and they log all their hours through our playlist app, and it'll ask like very basic questions. Our programmer is a volunteer too, and came up, and I believe it's open. You have to talk to our programmer. I believe it's open source too. But you can log your playlist in, and then you also, there's like a logging your volunteer hours. It'll just say like, date, time, basic description of what you did. And then at the end, programming has access to the back end of it. And while they're doing the show schedule, they will go through and make sure everybody's completed their volunteer hours. So that's, it's worked well for us, that part of it. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Gears here. I work at CCTV, but I have a show on KMUC, and I'm a little bit involved over there. And, well, to put it bluntly, this room skews a little bit more mature. And my question is like getting young people involved. And like I went to the station manager, and I'm like the one person that concentrates on new music, like cutting edge music, and I'm 55 years old, and there's a lot of legacy music stuff, and like, how do we get new music on? And the response was, well, the donors like the swing time hour and the classical music and stuff like that. So how do you, I don't know what kind of music you guys play, but if you're playing new music or current music, does that affect your ability to collect donations and that kind of stuff? And I guess that the wide-ranging question is, how do we get more young people involved? Because I'll be like on my way, my show's on Saturday nights. I stop at the Dutch Bros on the way, and the kids like, oh, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm going to do a radio show. And they're like, what's radio? And I'm being a little facetious, but not really, because they're listening to Pandora or something else, and the idea of broadcast radio isn't even on their radar.
Well, we're on the web, so that's an easy thing to tell as far as the last part. Music, we're in the, early mid stages of starting to figure out. I mean, we're very clear from the beginning. We have to, we're just trying to do as much local music as possible. So that's what we've focused on, and we just started broadening it out a little bit to make sure we do include hip hop and more than we had before, and we're just going to try and build from there. We do have some young people doing music, but
we have 5 minutes left, and I think Becky, so Becky works as the development director for KEPW, and I think KEPW has kind of also, maybe I'm wrong, but run into something kind of.
We also make it easy for kids and for youth to join. So like we have a youth collective. I think like popularly, like the understanding, because we do have some notably older folks doing programming, that they ignore the fact that from 6 to 7 most days is somebody under 21 doing that programming, often a person of color. So I want us to keep in mind that I think it's like I have mixed feelings and irritations when we say like, oh, like this is the thing that brings in money. It's literally not, because it is your purpose and value as a station, and the difference that you provide compared to commercial radio and what like other drudgery and sameness is out there that people give you money for. Yeah. Not that you are playing the warhorse like classical music, whatever, or like what you think folks like kind of skew. Also, how many of you get member numbers, like your listener numbers from Nielsen? Raise your hand. No one, right? Except me. And I can tell you that your numbers will look way different than you think they do. It is apocryphal and only just what you believe, because people are telling you that your listenership skews older, and that's not true. Just off my soapbox, folks. Sorry.
Thank you.
Well, I wanted to mention another resource for radio, non-commercial radio stations. It's a new organization called Oregon Community Media, and it's new, as I said, not fully formed. We're meeting next weekend, actually, here at KEPW. And some of the goals are to share programming, share underwriting opportunities with bigger underwriters, and a variety of things. Just share around, be supportive of each other. There's also been an effort to start one in Washington, a Washington Community Media. I don't know where that went. I have to ask Sabrina if she knows. Do you know Sabrina Roach?
I do.
Yeah. She would be the one to ask if that one got off the ground. I do invite everyone here in this room that's in Oregon to get on the mailing list, if nothing else, for Oregon Community Media. And when we've done all our background stuff and gotten systems going and got our 501c3 and all that other stuff, then we can get the programs going and help you out. And you can help us out. Everybody helps everybody out. Yeah. I think.
Yeah.
So it's a real opportunity, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because the environment that they are coming up in is so filled with misinformation. And we have found we have a strong component of millennials in our volunteer base, and we have found that they love it. They love the idea that there is a community hub that is Portland Radio Project. Some of them would sleep there. I'm convinced of it if they could. It's just I think that young people have a real hunger for authentic local media, and that's what we're all here for. And to have the opportunity to pass that to younger generations, is really an honor.
For me, Tacoma, it's from the very get-go, we've been talking at Radio Tacoma about how we want to represent Tacoma, not necessarily people who underwrite. We're here to represent the city and the people in it, and we've always wanted to have an accurate representation of the kind of people who live in Tacoma, and to show those voices. And I've been very lucky so far in that the first content I've produced specifically for LPFM ever was a series of podcasts out of the local high school. And I can tell you that once they found out that, because it was they thought they were signing up for introduction to podcasting class, and they ended up in a broadcasting class. Like, wait, there's a place where this can be on the radio in Tacoma, and I think there is an interest in local media there. I think there's a stronger interest than I think we realize.
There were a couple of sessions on engaging youth. Sorry about your ear, Becky.
No,
So
it's
that's-
okay. We're out of time.
Yeah.
That's it. We're out of time.
That they were recorded, and you can go back and look at those.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks. Okay.
Well, not
It's nice
Shut this
to
down and
see you in person. Yeah.
one Sam.
All my favorite people in one room.
I want to give you my card.
Yes.
And that's me. This is I do communications.
Okay.
And this is our station manager.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Thank you.
I do
wanna
not
steal this
have.
back. I started taking notes on that one.
I do not have a card with me. I'm sorry.
Okay,
But I
but,
can give you.
remind
I
me
can
which
give you my number.
Freeform Radio,
Yeah, I'm with
right?
Freeform
Okay.
Portland.
Freeform Portland, and you have the interesting logging back end with an app. Okay.
Yes,
Freeform
I
Portland.
do. That I'm happy to share as long as I'm all 99%.